everything else versus Bitcoin essentially gets spent and dies.
I want to be able to have reactive security, and I think Opvault is today the most straightforward, easiest to use way to do that.
I will not be insulted by a clockmaker.
Overall, these kind of ways to make the network easier to both build on and interact with, I think is a really big deal.
If Bitcoin existed when we started Twitter, we would not have to go down the ad model path. I mean, it's simple as that.
Integrating Lightning into a social network is the killer app.
Hello, and welcome to the Bitcoin.review podcast, where we explore developments and projects with the people who actually make them happen. The show is supported by Pod 2.0, Sat Streaming, and CoinKite. If you're a new listener, I'm NVK. I run CoinKite, where we've been helping people secure their Bitcoins for over a decade. We make the cold card and fun products like the block clock. You can find more information about it on coinkite.com. Today, we're going to be talking about Frost, and maybe we get even into roast, and that is not a dish. So with that, why don't I welcome our guests, Mr. Jesse Posner.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm working on an open source Frost implementation, so very excited to talk about Frost.
Very cool. Mr. Rijndael.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Seared Salmon.
Hello. The angry translator is back. I will help distill this wisdom that Jesse bestows upon us.
All right, guys. So why don't we sort of start from the very beginning here? What is Frost? Is it frozen?
It's cold, but not necessarily frozen. So Frost, I think the best way to explain Frost is first to kind of take a step back and think about how we typically set up multi-sig in Bitcoin, which is that we use scripts. So you can use a Bitcoin script to define a set of public keys and a threshold. And then if you want to spend that Bitcoin, there needs to be a production of signatures that matches the threshold in the public keys that is specified in the script. And so that's how we get these great multi-sig configurations for secure Bitcoin storage. But there's a few disadvantages to doing it this more traditional way. One is there's a privacy loss. So when you go to spend the Bitcoin, you have to reveal the script, and then that reveals the public keys that were involved in the threshold. And if you're using a very idiosyncratic setup, that might actually identify who you are. If you're like one of the only people that does a 25 of 108 or something, maybe, that creates a signature where people can identify what you're up to. At the very least, it reveals information about your setup that you probably don't want the whole world to know about. So there's this privacy leak. And the other potential issue is we can have some really big scripts with multi-sig because we have to list all the public keys explicitly. So Frost is a way of getting these same benefits of multi-sig, except when we look at the blockchain, we only see one public key and one signature, and it just looks like a key spend path for a taproot spend. And so you can't tell that there were multiple keys involved. You don't know anything about the threshold, and we get this nice constant space scaling efficiency where no matter how complex the multi-sig setup is, the amount of space that the redemption script takes on the chain is always the same.
Would you say that Frost is essentially single sig, right? As far as Bitcoin cares, right? Is Bitcoin single sig? And what you're doing there is some magical, fancy Shamir secret sharing of that original single key, right? In a way that nobody really has that single key, and then you just magically get everybody to sign in whatever M of N, which is really threshold, but let's just keep it simple. You find quorum, right, of those shards, And then once you have quorum of that, then you compose a Bitcoin single signature with that key, right? And now you have your Bitcoin. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you could kind of think of it as single sig from an on-chain perspective, but there's multiple signatures that are taking place off-chain that then are constructing the single signature that you see on-chain. And Shamir secret sharing is definitely a good point of reference here, because not only is Frost an improvement over multi-sig in terms of Bitcoin script, although there are some trade-offs, it's not simply superior, because with Frost, there's an interactive setup process that you need to do to create the key, whereas with the script-based method, you don't have that. But going back to Shamir secret sharing, it's a useful point of comparison. So typically, the way Shamir works is you have a secret, the private key, you split it into pieces, and then when you want to sign, you got to bring these pieces back together to reconstruct the key. And the generation and the reconstruction are two vulnerable points in the process, because that is where a single key is constructed all by itself. So you need like a very secure, trusted process to do that without leaking the secret. With Frost, we can generate Shamir shares without ever having to have a single secret that is split. So we have the shares, but we don't have the single secret. And then we can sign for this key without bringing the shares back together.
This is what's known as the polynomial interpolation, correct?
Well, so for Shamir secret sharing, the reconstruction is polynomial interpretation or interpolation. So the idea behind Shamir is if you have 2 points, those 2 points uniquely define one line. And if you have 3 points, those 3 points uniquely define a parabola. And in general, any n points uniquely defines an n-1 degree polynomial. So if you want to create a Shamir secret sharing shares, you have your secret, which is a private key, and then you create a polynomial with a degree that's equal to the threshold that is required to reconstruct. And then you set your secret as the coefficient of the first polynomial term. And then you create random coefficients for the other terms. And then what you do is you derive points that fit the polynomial. So you plug in x equals 1, you get a y value. You plug in x equals 2, you get a y value. And each one of these xy coordinate pairs is a Shamir share. So when you distribute Shamir shares, they're xy coordinate pairs that were derived from some polynomial. And then once you have, when you want to reconstruct, you get the necessary number of shares. So let's say we're doing a 2 of 3. We need 2 points to define the line. So once I know the 2 points, I can interpolate the line that crosses the 2 points. I can reconstruct the original polynomial, and then I can derive the secret by taking that first coefficient.
That sounds like moon math, as Lloyd famously said.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely getting a little bit too much into the weeds there. But, I guess the important part here is the magic of Frost is because you're doing that, you can now just share a nonce, right? So that you don't have to do all this computation interactively between all the parties.
I think like in the past, if you wanted to have some kind of threshold scheme to protect your Bitcoin, you had kind of 2 choices. You could either have single sig and you would Shamir split it, but then you still have to get all of the pieces back together on one device. And in that one device, if there's malware on it, if somebody kicks in your door, like whatever, like you have a single device with one key on it that can spend all of your money. Or you would go with script-based multi-sig, where you can go and do partial signatures at different places and then combine them together, but it's a lot bigger on chain. It's more expensive. It leaks some privacy information. Frost is kind of the best of both worlds. You can split up your key into multiple places and then go and do partial signatures with each of those individual shares and then combine them together. And from Bitcoin's perspective, it's still a single signature, but you have there's not one place where you have a key that gets reconstructed.
Could we touch on, I guess, maybe the different methods or functions for this scheme versus like the traditional ECDSA where we generate, assign, and verify? Like how does it get a bit more complex with the Shamir secrets and the nonce commitments and things like that?
Yeah, so basically, when you have just like a standard, let's say ECDSA or Schnorr signature, you generate a public-private key pair, and then you've got a sign algorithm and a verification algorithm. And it's pretty simple from an API perspective. Once we move into Frost land, things get more complex. So the first thing is we need to think about 3 distinct phases or processes. One is the key generation process itself. So if we're looking at, standard signatures, you just take a private key, a scalar that's in the SecP group, and you take the generator and you raise it to the power of that scalar, and that's your public key. Now, with Frost, we have to do something called distributed key generation because we want to build the key in a distributed way where multiple entities are contributing to the secrecy, to the entropy of the key without any one of those entities knowing what the actual key is. So that's DKG, and that's like a 3-round protocol to do the DKG. That's interactive. And so what happens is each participant generates a Shamir share or generates a Shamir polynomial and derives shares for each other participant. And then each participant takes the shares they've received and aggregated them. And what ends up happening is the aggregated shares are shares of the aggregated polynomials. Nobody knows the aggregated polynomials. Each participant only knows their own polynomial. And there's also some additional processes called VSS, where this is a more secure way of doing Shamir secret sharing, verifiable secret sharing, where you also distribute a commitment to your polynomial. So each participant can verify that the structure of the polynomial is what they expect. And then you also have to provide a proof of knowledge for the first coefficient term to prevent a row key attack. And you also need to provide a signature at the end, signing a hash of all the commitments to fulfill a broadcast channel requirement that each participant saw the same commitments as everybody else. So that's the first part, is the DKG. And at the end of that, each participant has a Shamir share of a private key, of which nobody knows the private key. And everybody has been able to derive the public key. So you have a public key and Shamir shares of a private key at the end of the DKG.
Yeah, like I think a reasonable mental model for this is if you think of Shamir secret sharing as like you go and you generate a secret, and this could be like a Bitcoin private key, or it could be a Nostr key or something else, and then you split it into pieces and you distribute those pieces and then you delete the original. That's the way that you would like shard out your private key with like Shamir secret sharing. The DKG that we do in Frost is kind of that, but upside down. So instead of starting with a shared key and then splitting it, you have your different participants, and these could be different people. They could be different signing devices. They could be different machines. They could be whatever. Your different participants each generate a share, and then you have a way for them to combine the shares together to basically create a shared secret that nobody has at any point in time. And then the last thing that Jesse was touching on is there's all kinds of attacks that you can do where if you can sort of reactively choose your shares based on what other people's shares are, then you might be able to cancel out certain terms, or you might be able to cause like denial of service or cause like other problems later on when those keys get used. So there's some additional like we're going to say nonce commitment a lot during this episode, but there's a bunch of points during key generation and during signatures where before you reveal a value, you send over a hash of it so that people can tell that you didn't like change your mind later when you saw their values. So there's a couple moving parts there as well.
So that's like a nice sort of like I'd say like a deeper dive into how it works. I guess like let's explore some use cases here, because that might help people sort of start to understand like what is the value of all this. Because why not multisig, right? And I mean, multi-sig in practice is an absolute clusterfuck. It's horrible. It's like horrific, right? It's so bad that most people still advise people to just go single sig with passphrase, right?
Yeah.
Because, in multi-sig, you're essentially committing to the M of N right from the beginning, right? And it's very strict, right? Like in very plain terms. I mean, if you set something to be 2 of 3, it is 2 of 3 forever, right? And there is no half of something. There's nothing. It's just 2 of 3. It is on chain, right? So that means that everybody can see once you sign a single transaction, they can see it. It's so bad that I can't remember which exchange was, but somebody did a timing attack or just timing analysis on, it might have been BitMEX or something like that, where they essentially figured out where each of the executives were and which of them signed the big balance of some cold storage. It might not have been BitMEX, so don't associate that name with it. I can't really remember which one it was, but it was a big one.
They do have like a 3 of 6 threshold payout wallet or something, right?
I can't remember.
Well, I mean, yeah. So like the first benefit that a lot of people see with things like Frost or Musig, which is related, but Musig is N of N, and Frost is threshold, so it's T of N. The first benefit that a lot of people see is, again, on chain, it just looks like a single sig, and so if we move into this world where people might have tap scripts that they don't reveal, and they're able to make payments through the key path, and you can do that either as a single sig or as a threshold signature, then it really helps with privacy and fungibility, because like nobody can tell if that's one key that you're using or 50 keys or 100 keys. Like it's all just a single signature. That also makes things cheaper. Like you're not paying for all of these other public keys on chain. I think those are really cool benefits. But for me, the crazy superpower that Frost has is, earlier when Jesse was describing, say that you have a 2 of 3, the mental model here is, imagine the private key is like at the y-intercept of some graph, and then you draw a line through that, and you pick 3 points on that line, and any 2 of them can reconstruct the line and get you back to your private key. What's cool is if you have 2 of those points, you can pick a third point. So you can effectively generate new keys without actually, or new key shares without actually changing the private key. So, imagine if you have a multi-sig, like you have a 2 of 3 or a 3 of 5 or a 11 of 15 or something, and you lose one of your signers. Right now, what you basically have to do is either just live with it, or you have to do like a wallet sweep and move all of your funds to a new wallet with a new set of signers.
What everybody does is move.
Yeah.
And every time you have a new executive, you have to do that again.
Yep.
And and the issue with that is these are each actual Bitcoin keys. So you have to go through the trouble of like creating backups of each, burying them wherever you bury them, traveling around. It's an absolute cluster. And there is no good, secure way of creating a Bitcoin multi-sig quorum either, right? So there's no trusted way for you to communicate with each other to create that script either, even with BSMS, BIP 329. Is it 329? I can't remember now. But regardless, there is no good way of doing that. And I think like Frost really addresses like most of all low-hanging fruit that this does, and adds more.
Yeah, like there's definitely more complexity, but being able to say, hey, I want to add new keys or remove old keys without actually needing an on-chain transaction, without perturbing all of your UTXOs is just a wild capability that I think we haven't really seen in Bitcoin. And it opens a lot of doors for key management, especially if you have, if some of your signers are like really hard to get to, or if they're really locked down and you don't want to go and touch them every time you have to add or remove a key. It's a pretty crazy superpower.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I was sort of like thinking about the complexities like of just in practice of doing Frost. And because you kind of solved most of the interactivity issues with pre-generated nonces. It is not hard to share with each other some nonces and store them on hardware wallets. That should be fairly straightforward. And especially I think like if somebody's going through the trouble of creating a proper Frost wallet with like important signers and real money, I mean, you can pre-generate, I don't know, like 1,000 of them. I don't know, maybe 1,000 might be much, but you store them and now you're good to go. What's still unclear to me, and we'll get to roast later, is like when you unroll, like when you take somebody out of you essentially like queue one of the shares, if the nonces are still valid or not. I haven't looked into that. But regardless, I think that's been greatly, because originally with Mosig, when I saw that, I said like, okay, well, this is cute. I see cryptographers are having a lot of fun with this, but there's absolutely no fucking way you can do this in the wild because, unless you're using HSM servers, it's kind of pointless because like if you're going to keep wallets hot in order to do all this back and forth and it compounds too, right? So as you're doing all this essentially almost like multi-party computation here, it's kind of loses the point. And then again, like the Frost came in, I'm like, oh, fuck, yeah, this is usable. So Jesse.
Yeah, so let's chat about nonces. So the thing is, so when we do like ECDSA and Schnorr, we have the luxury of being able to use a deterministic nonce. The main issue with nonces is if you reuse a nonce across two different signatures, the private key can be trivially computed. So, it's the worst case scenario. You do not want to reuse nonces under any circumstances. So with a typical signing algorithm like ECDSA, we can just take the private key and the message and hash it and use that as the nonce. And that way, if the message changes, the nonce will change. And you've got a pretty good guarantee you're never going to reuse the nonce. Once you get into Musig and Frost, we can't do that anymore. And in fact, it can be quite dangerous to generate your nonce deterministically in these multi-party protocols, because if a malicious participant causes the generation to restart, all the participants are going to generate the same nonce, but the aggregate nonce will change. And so you can actually induce nonce reuse because of deterministic nonces once you move into this multi-party setting.
Well, just before we move on, what's the issue? I don't think people know, but what's the issue of reusing a nonce?
Yeah, so let's say, this is very algebraic. Like the outcome is the private key is leaked. Why?
Exactly, money gone.
How did Schnorr make it easier? Yeah.
Well, it's a problem for both ECDSA and Schnorr, but it's easier to explain with Schnorr because the equation for Schnorr is so simple. It's S equals R plus CX. So if you have two signatures, S1 and S2, with C1 and C2. So you've got S1 equals R plus C1X, and you've got S2 equals R plus C2X. When you minus S1 minus S2 and divide C1 minus C2, that equals X, your private key. So anybody just looking at the blockchain or looking at the two signatures are public data. If you just take these two signatures, subtract them, subtract the challenge hashes, which are also public data, and you can get the private key. And this has happened in the wild. One of the most notable cases is the PlayStation 3 firmware. They reused the same nonce when they're updating their firmware. They leaked their private key, and now you can like jailbreak your PS3 and do whatever you want with it.
Run a full node.
Yeah, exactly. So the nonces have to be dealt with very, very carefully. And so when we use either Frost or Musig, we have an option, which is we can pre-generate nonces in advance to bring the signing down to a single round. Or we can do a nonce generation protocol for each signing round, which adds additional communication rounds. And so, but there is a risk to pre-generating the nonces, because let's say you pre-generate, 1,000 nonces. You have to think about the attack vectors that could trick a device into...
Did we lose Jesse? This was an important part, guys. This was a really important part. Jesse, you might want to repeat this part. It kind of matters.
Jesse's like, whatever you don't do, and then it cuts out.
Don't do it, and like it just freezes. This is beautiful.
Yeah. The NSA cut the wire. It's amazing.
That's right. This was the attack vector, and now everything is fine.
We never received the
always layers here. Yeah, somebody's gonna come back with a Jesse mask on and say, "Guys, just use deterministic nonces when you're."
That's right. I mean, do we trust that Jesse's Jesse when he comes back?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be hard to follow up here, as I'm not qualified to replace Jesse on the rest of this explanation.
Yeah, I mean, so the main thing is I wanted to continue down the line of like the different functions now associated with Frost, and also maybe if you guys could touch on like the schemes, right? There's an accountability scheme versus a privacy scheme, and that's protection from, I guess, the public versus the other signers. And then eventually what led to the TAPS scheme. I don't know how much Rijndael is in the know with that stuff either.
I don't know what the TAPS scheme is, but I'm very familiar with the accountability issue because me and Nick Farrow were talking about the shitpost DAO that I want to do on Nostr using Frost.
Yeah, we can take a quick usability tangent or use case tangent.
Yeah, I mean, so like one of the other things that's really cool about Frost is Nostr uses Schnorr signatures, right? So all of the cool things that we've been talking about being able to do with signature aggregation with Schnorr, you can actually use in Nostr. So Nick Farrow, who is UTXO Club on Twitter, I think I'm the North America branch of the Nick Farrow fan club. He made a tool called Froster. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Froster.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, God, that's a little too close to Froffer.
Yeah, right. And it's
I don't know.
It lets you do Nostr posts with Frost keys, so you can actually do threshold signing for Nostr. I think Jesse's coming back.
Jesse. Well, we better see a new nonce use when he comes back.
Hi.
Okay. Can we have proof that it's actually you and you're not going to give us a different answer now that you've been compromised by the NSA?
We haven't done a key exchange protocol in advance, so I don't think there's any way for us to have cryptographic certainty, but
okay. We're going to have to just roll with it.
All right, person who claims to be Jesse, you were in the middle of saying, we have
not
to think
do
of
this
attack vectors against.
The line was, you have to think about the attack vectors that could.
Right. So if you take away one thing from this whole conversation, blink. Yeah. So what I was saying is that the devices could be tricked into reusing a nonce. Let's say you load 1,000 pre-generated nonces onto a hardware wallet. How does the hardware wallet keep track of the nonces that it's already used? It could try to delete nonces that's already used. It could have a counter. It's not impossible, but that is where that's where you have to put some attention into to making sure there's no way, like with a fault injection.
I have a couple ideas.
Yeah, please.
So we started doing this thing where every single export that Coldcard does has a detached signature. So essentially, you can actually verify that the owner of that private key essentially gave out this actual PSBT for you to sign or co-sign or the address explorer. So essentially the addresses that it's providing are the actual addresses that were provided, so the computer didn't cheat it. So you could use detached signatures in a way. It's not foolproof because, I guess it is, because the issue here is if you have access to the private key, then you have access to the private key, so you don't really care. So that could help. Another thing that we could maybe do is we could have a Hall Diffie sort of kind of like a handshake between all the wallets that are part of the quorum, so that every time you send, this is part of actually, I'd love to add this to PSBT V2, which is maybe there's a signature to the actual PSBT. And you can start building a little bit of more trusted comms, right, between the things. So it's a lot harder for you to cheat with the messaging transit or this sort of partially signed or unsigned bits that you have to have in and out of the wallets, as long as it's not interactive again. Because to me, the best, like the ultimate benefit you get in terms of like free security is just not attaching things to anything, right? Like, I mean, it's amazing. Like you can have an encrypted piece of data on your desk, right? If it's not connected to anything, it's better than any kind of encryption that ever existed, right? So if we start connecting wallets together, we kind of lose all the beautiful benefit of being air gap. So I just keep on thinking, like, how can we maybe find other ways of signing things? And we've been sort of like breaking our head. And one is detached signatures. The other thing is we can maybe start signing. So detached signature plus another signature that's done with a secret that's part of the hardware, not part of the key that is holding. And it wouldn't be a key that you can easily change or anything like that, right? Like it's like a key that's part of the secure element or something like that. So you'd have to break both in order to, for example, fake that nonce or tell it to use it. Like
it's like some device authenticity key or something that's like comes from some PUF in the device, and it's not actually your Bitcoin key. It's like a device export, like authenticity check or something.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I didn't want to take too much in a tangent of the hardware deep hole, but
well, there's a couple important nuances here. So first of all, imagine if you have disjoint sets of signers. Let's say you have 3 or 6. So you have 3 signers that may not know that this other set of 3 signers use the same nonce. It's actually not as much of an issue in Frost compared to the older threshold schemes, because in Frost, each subset of signers has a completely different nonce. Whereas in some of the very similar protocols that were precursor to Frost, all the signers would actually get to the same, each subset of signer could create the same nonce. So that's less of an issue, but it's something you have to think about is not all the signers are going to have the same view of what took place.
But with Frost, that wouldn't be an issue.
Right. So with Frost, that's actually not an issue. The other thing, though, to consider is there is already some interactivity to get the signature from the device to the coordinator that's going to aggregate the signatures.
Yeah, but that could be done on SneakerNet, right? So you're not as concerned.
But if you could do that through SneakerNet, you could also do an additional nonce round through SneakerNet. So it's a trade-off of saying, okay, maybe we add an additional round. We already have 1 round, maybe 2 rounds is fine. Or we, really think through securing the pre-generated nonces and then having a system to re-up the nonces when they run out.
Yeah, so I'll just weigh in here a little bit because we've been thinking about this a little. Like actual sort of like implementation. And I think you kind of end up in the same place because, if you're protecting the private key, and you lose that, you're kind of screwed anyways. So if you can protect the private key, you can protect the nonces, right? Because it's going to be essentially benefiting from the same level of protection. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've learned through these years now is that most of the people who are air gapping their devices wised it up, and they don't have the device in the same place as the coordinator or in the same place of really anything. So say, for example, a guy will have his hardware wallet sitting in some safe deposit box in Monaco or something, right? So he'll fly from Miami to Monaco. He'll go inside his safe deposit box without a computer, just a PSBT inside a micro SD card. He goes inside there. There's no radios there or anything. He signs his transaction, right? And then he flies back to Miami with this signed transaction for the secondary signer to sign in some other location, right? And it's kind of fascinating. This capacity of doing like a single touch per device, fully air gap, fully remotely, like it creates this amazing security for no cost except for time and space displacement. But
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the protection that Jesse is hitting on is, I think a lot of people think of having a single touch signer as being able to be like a stateless device where like it boots up, it has a key on it, you use it to sign a PSBT, and then you shut it off, and like nothing has changed other than the power state. And if you are doing a bunch of pre-committed nonces in a batch, then there's some additional state that you have to keep track of where you either need to make sure that you like securely delete the nonce that was just used, or you have to keep like an index for like how far into your list of pre-computed nonces you're using. And you cannot mess that up. Like if you mess that up, you will lose your key. And so I think that, you know, for some designs for signers, that might be a new amount of state that they need to either mutate or deal with, like popping off the front of a stack or something. And like you really have to not mess that up or you leak your private key.
Yeah. I mean, you know, right now, we kind of already have a little. So, for example, in our case, right, on Cold Card case, we actually have state for multisig because of grifting attacks.
Yep.
Right. So technically you could, if you don't know, you know, what the change output is, or, you know, like you can have grifting attacks there where they send it to a non-derivation, all kinds of shit. So we find that multisig without state is pretty unsafe. So that's one thing, right? Now, I wonder, I'm sure people come up with it. People smart as Jesse is will come up with some little scheme on how maybe you need to prove that you know what is the next nonce before you sign it, for example. Like, I don't know, maybe there is like a little protocol that is also part of that single interaction. So, you know, everybody knows essentially not to use the previous nonce, right? Maybe there's a hash of the previous nonce that's included in that PSBT. So you know, you have a hash list, so you're not using the bare nonces, and you know that like, okay, don't use this one because this one is the previous, or something clever than that. I'm sure.
You also have the problem of potentially leaking a private key just for a single signer. So let's say you had a hardware device that didn't put in a secure way of preventing itself from reusing a nonce, and somehow, like let's say through a fault injection attack, where right when it's going to sign and increment its counter and delete the nonce, you force the device to crash, but it still exports the signature. So then when it reboots, it doesn't realize it already did that nonce, and then you ask for a new signature of a new message. Now, just from that one device, you've been able to extract the private key. Even if you haven't been able to extract the aggregate private key, you've been able to extract the component private key for that one device. So it's not that it's impossible to secure. It's just something that people need to pay extra attention to. And if you put the time and the effort, like there are secure ways to do it. But if you do it naively, then you could get into trouble.
It's a good year, Mark.
So, but yeah, I think the rotating stuff is actually really useful. To be able to rotate the shares without changing the underlying secret, because especially in a high fee environment, having to do sweeps a lot could get expensive. And where it can get really interesting is actually in a Lightning context. And I think in terms of use cases, I think in Lightning, I think that may be eventually where we see Frost get its biggest benefits. Yeah. Because with Lightning, we don't really have a native way to do multisig. And that's why we kind of treat our Lightning wallets like a hot wallet, not like a cold wallet, not for long-term savings, for short-term everyday spending, because you got one key that signs the state updates. You don't have your fancy multi-sig cold storage and so on. But with Frost, and really only, well, either with Frost or with ECDSA MPC, we have a way of potentially getting multi-sig-like security with our Lightning keys. Because we can take these single keys and we can split them up. And from the Lightning protocol layer, it still just looks like a single key, a single signature. but actually is requiring multiple entities to sign. It's now, when we think about doing this with the Taproot channel, what we'd actually be doing is embedding a Frost key inside of a Musig key. So when we set up a Taproot channel, we have a 2 of 2 Musig between the channel counterparties. Now, one or both of these public keys that creates the Musig key could in fact have been generated with Frost. So now we have a Frost key embedded in Musig key. We know we can do this algebraically. We know we can produce valid signatures. What we don't yet have is a security proof. So I would caution anybody from just, implementing this and signing. Hopefully we'll get that security proof in the not too distant future. There's a lot of reasons to think that it is secure, but we just want to make sure that that is the case. And then there's another complexity with this, which is all the signers ideally would have a BFT consensus about the state of the channel, because otherwise one of the offline signers could get tricked into signing a revoked state or an old channel state because they don't know about the state updates that the other signers are doing. So the offline signer needs to be able to come to consensus about what the latest state is. But once we have security proof, and if you can have BFT consensus among the signers, then we can get these highly secure Lightning wallets that we can have more funds in the wallet securely. And when a secret is lost and we need to rotate shares, we don't actually have to close and reopen the channel because the underlying secret didn't change. So we can keep the channel, the same channel open even when we're recovering and have lost devices and things like that.
One thing that sort of came to mind the first time I bumped into the Frost paper was the fact that we can really, really de-risk risky devices, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, you can now have a phone, right? Where, phones are kind of, all the hardware for phones are already owned, right? So your wonderful cypherpunk Android is fully remote accessible by the carrier. Same is for your iPhone and all this stuff. So, I'm thinking, hey, with this, you could have 2-3 phones each with a highly de-risked key, right? So a low threshold key. And then you can have your, CK bunker running your higher threshold key with some policy. And then you can start having these little protocols where, a device talks to the other device, it talks to the other device, and, money moves or money doesn't move. And if you lose your key, you don't really if you don't lose your phone or your phone gets owned or whatever, it's not really a big deal. Maybe we arrive at a place where, hardware wallets are not even required anymore, in a distant future here, or at least not for mid-size funds or operational funds, right? The phones are still fucked to the AI, but, your air-gapped devices can resolve a lot of the AI attack issues. But anyways, I think we're still sort of thinking in terms of trying to fix old problems instead of just sort of really looking much more forward into what can we actually create that was not possible, right? I don't know. I feel like we're still stuck in that.
Yeah, and there's a project called VLS. It's validating Lightning Signer, and the idea is to take the Lightning state machine and separate it out from all of the RPC bits and just have that available as a signer. And so you can run that in a really constrained environment and have it do policy-based signing of Lightning channel updates. And I think if you combine it with kind of this idea, you can imagine that you have this multi-sig Lightning wallet, and you have less trusted keys on your phones. You have a more trusted key in your CK bunker or, some other more lockdown computing environment running VLS. And that thing can do policy-based signing, and you can start having, different risk levels for your different signers and have them more or less accessible.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting model for future key management. And I think Frost really helps in terms of having this flexibility and being able to add and remove signers without changing the underlying secret. So let's say you have a bunch of different signers amongst the devices people already have, their watch, their phone, their computer, their tablet. Like, people already have many different devices, and they could all be participating in a Frost quorum where you could add and remove these devices. You can rotate the shares across those devices and create this really flexible key management setup across many different signers without having to kind of have it be so locked into a fixed configuration right from the outset.
Back to the low-hanging fruit of Lightning and its interactivity. Currently, there's 6 secrets that need to be generated, and of which I think it's 3 or 4 need to be online at all times. Is that right?
I don't know the exact number, but roughly, yeah. I mean, you've got the funding key, you've got the revocation secret. Those all have to be online. You've got the payment hash preimage has to be online. But then, like, the keys for the that get paid out from the outputs don't have to be online.
Yep.
Gotcha. So then Frost would easily replace the ones that are online, assuming we get the security proof and all the moon math checks out. But that's the goal.
Yeah. So you've got the funding key can be done with Frost. The output keys can be done with Frost. The thing that is the trickiest is actually the revocation secret. So the way we currently do the revocation secret is we use what is referred to as Rusty's trick, where there's this hash scheme to derive a secret and to store a secret that is super space efficient. So I think it's even like constant space scaling. And the thing is, that does not work with Frost, because Frost, you can't sign over once it goes through the hash, Frost can no longer operate on the secret. So this very specific scheme that is used would not be available. So what we'd have to do is you'd basically get an unbounded growing list of secrets that have to be archived. When you get the revocation secret from the counterparty, like, there's not an efficient way to store that until we maybe come up with something else. But for now, that would be the trade-off, is like you just have this growing archive of secrets.
Well, what I'm hearing is you're a LN symmetry and L2 supporter. So that, yes. I guess the revocation and punishment mechanisms being updated would further simplify this.
Yeah, I think L2 is going to work much more nicely with Frost because of that change to how the revocation works.
Very cool. So what's the state of implementations now? I mean, like, when can we start sort of seeing some people playing with this in the actual wild?
Yeah, good question. So I have a PR in the secp-zkp repo that has a full Frost implementation that's currently in review. I just proposed a refactor based upon some of the review comments, and I'm about halfway through implementing the refactor. And hopefully that's pretty much like very close to where we need to be, and we can get it merged in within the next few months. And I also have a Python implementation that I need to update. It does a Schnorr signature, but not BIP340 compatible, that I'm going to be updating within the next few weeks, that people can use to generate valid signatures and kind of for prototypes and experimentations, and to understand how the protocol works better. And the last thing is there's a brand new implementation that Tim Ruffing just pointed to in my Frost PR. That is another libsecp based Frost implementation that just came out recently, and it looks quite nice. I'm going to take a look at it and see if there's some good ideas that maybe I'll migrate to my own implementation. So we've got basically those three. Oh, and the SecP fun.
Yeah. There's the SecP fun one that Nick Farrow did. I don't know if you've looked at that one. I think it produces BIP340 compliant signatures.
It does. Yeah.
I was talking to Nifty about that, I think in Miami, and she mentioned your Python implementation. I guess BIP340 compliance in this context is something about supporting X only or something like that, right?
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's funny because there's no Schnorr. There's not actually like a standard Schnorr specification, unlike ECDSA that has, is well specified. There's all these Schnorr flavors, and there's little variations of how you can hash things. And so BIP340 is a specific implementation of Schnorr, and its most notable kind of distinct quality is that it uses X-only public keys.
That's what I think we're using for the last for the Edge release of CodeCard. It was the X only.
Yeah, it's what you need. Taproot.
Yeah, all of Taproot is X only public keys, much to the chagrin of many cryptography implementers who, like, the level of code complexity that is required to account for X only public keys is pretty substantial. So there's a lot of work to save that one byte.
Yeah, I've screwed up that parity bit when I've done key tweaking before. It's subtle, but yeah, the one that's in SecP 256K fun, that one's in Rust, and I think Froster ends up using that. So if you want to do threshold signing for Nostr because you want to keep the intern from posting on your Nostr account, or because you want to have multi-sig for Nostr, or because you want to make a shitpost DAO, there's a Rust implementation of Frost that you can use.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nostr is a really interesting use case because we don't have any other way of doing multi-sig on Nostr, literally. Like, Frost is all you've got because there's no ECDSA, so there's no ECDSA MPC, there's no Bitcoin script, and it uses BIP340 signatures. So, and we need secure Nostr key management. It's your whole online identity. It's really important to secure those keys. And right now they're just like floating around in password managers or on people's phones or emails and stuff. And what we really want is like a multi-sig hardware wallet enforced Nostr signing setup. That's at least what I want. And I think Frost is going to be how we get that.
I mean, it's going to be really hard to use Nostr hardware wallets because, like, every single it's signed.
That's true.
I mean, yeah, like, and I've been talking to the guys a lot about this. It's like, okay, it's great. Yeah, we can sign some of these keys now, but we can't really practically use it. So Pablo just released today NSEC Bunker.
NSEC Bunker, really?
NSEC Bunker, I know. We feel flattered, Pablo. He borrowed CK Bunker.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's kind of like a HSM as a service for your NSEC keys, right, on Nostr, because companies can't share their keys with their employees because there's just a key. So I don't know. I'm very much looking forward to Frost for Nostr because you can now share keys with employees, but they don't have full threshold, then you get to approve things and they can't run away with your company keys.
Well, and it would be cool to have some policy evaluation in there, because like you could imagine you could have a policy enforcing signer for Nostr messages that are like, right, if you're going to like or repost an event, then that just gets approved. But if you're going to zap something, then like you have a budget, and if you're going to post a note, then that has to be approved.
No, it's more fun to do full censorship on the employees. So like if they want to say, for example, say, I like big blocks, it doesn't sign.
That's right.
You can really get in there. Yeah, no, but the main issue with Nostr is that, like, unlike, so Bitcoin, you can just move the funds to a new key, right? With Nostr, I mean, your identity is that key. So, until we have some Galaxy Brain figure out some key delegation on a network, Nostr-like network, which is too hard to have state, and nobody knows how to do it. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna get weird and interesting. Maybe we're just gonna have a society acceptance that you burn keys.
I was gonna just say, luckily these keys are not used for money, so
In some places they are.
Yeah.
I get, that's fair.
No, the YOLO is only gonna get stronger.
Yeah.
There's been the two things that I've seen, Arc has been in the news lately, and I think right now the current plan for Arc is that it's going to use a Nostr key as kind of like a silent payment type key. And then the other one is there's a Lightning wallet that they wanted to add ordinal support, and so they're using your NPub as a public key and using it for Bitcoin also. So people are starting to use Nostr keys for Bitcoin, which is terrifying.
Wait, they're using a Nostr key that was a Lightning node pub key to receive ordinals?
It's for on-chain, right? So they're taking like your Nostr NPub and using it for on-chain Bitcoin.
Gotcha. Oof. That's,
why?
One does not ask why.
No. I can tell you the real reason. The real reason is it's a bear market. People might be trying to raise money or like show growth. So for the users, right, this is like the adoption or like that bootstrapping of like that user base, because people are using Nostr. So you're like, hey, if I add this quick feature, then we'll suddenly get this user, and then we'll suddenly have like 5K or 10K users. But I think that's short-sighted, probably for the same reasons you guys are saying, because once someone actually does lose that money, then whatever goodwill and usability you've brought up is.
Yeah, I think it was actually more opportunistic than that. It's like there's a browser extension that's a in-browser Lightning wallet that's actually like pretty good for an in-browser Lightning wallet that also has Nostr support. And so there's a Nostr key in there, and somebody wanted to build a market where you could pay Lightning and then receive an ordinal. And they were like, where are you going to get a on-chain compatible public key from? We'll use your Nostr key. And like, so here we are. So it's going to happen. So Frost for Nostr keys is probably going to be a thing that gets more serious when people realize that they have bags attached to their Nostr identity.
Yeah, I mean, you could also lose all your cashew as well.
That's true.
Cashew is going to be worth a lot of money. Jesse, are you familiar with the Cashew project?
No, I'm not.
It's Chamin single sig.
It's very, very cool. I mean, Kali, who wrote that, I mean, it's just Chamin Mint, and you can trade these tokens using Nostr. I don't know if it's fully integrated with Nostr or not.
Yeah, the command line version is. So like if you use the command line Apache client, you like Jesse, if I have your NPub, I can say send 500 sats to this NPub, and it sends like a Nostr DM to you with a bunch of Cashew eCache, and then you run the Cashew command line client, and it grabs your DMs and looks for Cashew tokens in them, and then automatically redeems them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's
cool.
It's essentially the hackers' version of Fediment without being federated. They were first to market. Anyways, it's and I think the Fedi guys are also going to do a lot of stuff related to Nostr as well. Well, actually, Mutiny as well. So I don't know if you're familiar with Mutiny.
Mm-hmm.
You are. So they are also using Nostr IDs as a way to have a contact to send Bitcoin to. I don't know to the extent of the integration because I didn't read it, but I think people are starting to use that because it is a signed ID, right? And it's self-signed too, which is really cool. So you have a permanent person, right? A permanent ID somewhere. It's gonna get weird. It's gonna be weird and cool, but it's gonna get weird. Okay, guys. I mean, do you guys want to start touching a little bit on Roast? I think maybe a good point, unless there is something else that we missed there on the first part.
I think like the downside for Frost. So like we've been talking about lots of good things for Frost. So like smaller on-chain footprint. If there's second layer protocols that assume that you have single sig, then like you can just kind of drop Frost in there. That's like really nice. Being able to add or remove keys is really nice. Being able to change the configuration of your multi-sig is really nice. Some of the downsides, just to like round it out, are there's more complexity and it's more stateful around like the nonce commitments that we talked about. But another one that we haven't really mentioned is if you're using multi-sig in like a multi-user setup, so you have a bunch of people at your company and everybody holds a key. If you're doing script-based multi-sig, you can tell on chain like who signed, which adds some really nice like transparent accountability. And with Frost, all of those signatures get aggregated down into a single signature. And so if you had a 3 of 5 and all of the money moves on chain, you can't really look on chain and see like which 3 people moved it. So, if accountability is a feature that you're looking for, then there's some other things that you can do. And like, there's a number of schemes out there, but in general, like where Frost starts having some trade-offs is if you wanted to use it for something like the Fediment on-chain wallet, you might want to like really make sure that which of the Fediment like Federation Guardians signed for the money if like all of the money leaves. And so if you're going to adopt something like Frost, then you need to add some additional like mitigations to make sure that you have accountability.
Yeah. I mean, nothing is without trade-offs, but
oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like every single time, like, you start sort of examining like the practicality of standard multisig P2SH, right? You really sort of like, it's just like a pit of sorrow, it's just horrible. I mean, because see, we talk about like, yes, technically now you need some statefulness, right? But
I'll take it. Sounds great.
In practice, you need statefulness in multisig too, because you have 3 metal plates now that need to be buried somewhere or need to be reshamirred somewhere else, right? Like, I mean, or like the security risk of rolling all the funds into a new wallet and the privacy loss, because you're not going to do some crazy coin join to move all your business money from one wallet that might be compromised to another, right? Like, things break down so fast when you get into the actual practicality of it that when you compare the actual practical concerns of Frost versus P2SH, right? Like, those trade-offs are not as bad. I mean, they really aren't. And at the end of the day, I mean, like, I feel like right now it's been very sort of, the hardware signing sort of industry has been sort of like a little bit too script kiddie-like with some things where, we got to grow up and learn how to do statefulness on things properly and have better protocols on how to exchange the information. And, it's just, there is a lot of money to be stolen and we see, bad implementations out there who they do get owned. But like, I feel like as this industry sort of scales, like really into more people, more targets, like we're really going to have to grow up and do things in more complex ways that do sort of, address a lot of this with other sets of trust things that are not just the Bitcoin signature itself, right? So it's the devices, it's some protocol between the devices, it's, the devices have second set of signatures or like how it decrypts the secret inside, whatever. It's all part of growing up as an industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree.
I mean, they say like in cryptography or in Bitcoin, you replace all problems with key management problems. We don't have to worry about we don't have to worry about the Fed or, all this other crap. But the one thing we do have to worry about is key management. And increasingly, as more and more of the world is built on top of this basis, these keys are literally going to secure our entire civilization. And we're going to need to keep upping the game for how we manage them.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you do, just keep them offline. I can't emphasize this enough to people. Every conversation should end with, you never plug them in.
Air gapping is strong.
Right?
I'll cue them up for the roast stuff. So far, to summarize Frost, we have, it's unforgeable under concurrent signing sessions. It's semi-interactive signing with respect to a pre-signature round that you can still exchange your committed nonce without a message or like the subset, and then the signature round. So Frost doesn't solve the robustness. What is robustness, Jesse? What is an identifiable abort? And why should we even care about having multiple concurrent sessions?
Okay, great question. So robustness is a guarantee within a signing round that as long as you have a threshold of honest participants, that you can get to a signature without a malicious participant disrupting the round. So in Frost, in advance, we have to pick, okay, who's going to be signing? Let's say we have a 33 out of 100 setup. And let's say we go to we want to create a signature, like let's say to a Fede mint or something like that. There needs to be a selection of who is going to sign. And then the coordinator will pick out the signers. Then the signers will proceed to produce signatures. But if the signatures are invalid, then you have to figure out who submitted an invalid signature, then restart the process, kick the malicious participant out, or maybe they're just unavailable, or they're not malicious, there's a bug in their code, but to kick out the defective participant and then proceed again. And when you have like a very large set of signers, you could have a denial of service vector where participants could keep disrupting the signing process. So what roast does is it creates a guarantee that you're going to get to a signature as long as you have a sufficient number of honest participants. And the way it does that is it actually instantiates multiple Frost sessions in parallel. So roast is just a wrapper around Frost. You take the Frost APIs and you just structure them in a new way and you run them in parallel. And that's how you get roast. And since you have these parallel sessions, if some of the sessions don't complete, you have other sessions that will complete, and you're guaranteed to get to this outcome. And it's really something when you get to large sets of participants where that becomes important. Obviously, in something like a 2 of 3, it doesn't matter. If one of the participants doesn't complete, you just switch to the other and you're done. But as you get more and more participants, roast is a really nice way to guarantee you're going to get this signature.
You know, Jesse, I was having a drink with Justin, and I mentioned to him that the ideal federation, every single participant in the federation, in that mint would have a key, and then you're back into democracy, where the majority can print the money.
This is just Eddie. Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing. Like, so maybe I have missed this from before. So can any party coordinate, or do you need a specific secret, or how does it work for you to coordinate that maybe is different than P2SH?
So in Frost, a coordinator isn't actually required. It's an optimization. So if you don't have a coordinator, then you need like a broadcast mechanism, because you're going to be doing, you're trading around nonce commitments, and then you're trading around like partial signatures. So having a coordinator is just like an optimization where everybody sends their pieces to the coordinator, and the coordinator sends pieces to other participants instead of everybody having to send everything to everybody else. The coordinator can be any of the participants, and they don't have any like special secret key or something. So you could, if this is like you're, running Sparrow on your laptop and it has Frost support and you have a bunch of like signers, then you could use Sparrow as the signature aggregator. Like that's the coordinator. If this is like a multi-party protocol, then it could be like any person maybe you have some like verifiable random shuffle, or you take the last block hash and you do a mod the number of people and you say, okay, Jim, you're the coordinator now. It can be like any other participants.
So to summarize, and using Chelsea Cumlow's language, the combiner is what we're referring to as a coordinator here. And then a signer can also be a combiner, or the combiner can just be some other entity in general that gets all the shares.
Yeah, that gets the signatures.
No, signatures.
Yeah, it doesn't get shares. It gets signatures.
Yeah, so, and typically, only what, like, let's say you're signing a Bitcoin transaction. Somebody's going to take the Bitcoin transaction and publish it to the network. Not every participant is going to each publish it. So usually you have somebody, some entity or system or service that's actually going to aggregate the signatures, publish the transaction, but it's not, they have no secret data. They can't steal funds. They can't forge a signature. They don't have to be trusted. The main thing they can do is just thwart the signing, denial of service. But they can't steal. They don't have anything secret, and anybody can serve that function and play that role.
Very cool. So are you concerned about having different sets of signers not coordinating correctly and maybe signing funds out without, say, for example, a group of 6? Say you have a 6 out of 100, right? Something silly, and you only need 10, right? So 10 of them sign, right? But then what if another 10 are doing the same thing and another 10 are doing the same thing? I guess you're just going to bump into issues where you're going to have spent outputs, right?
Yeah, I think it would be the same as if you had I'm going to make this up. If you had a 1 of 15, P2SH multi-sig, and you had different people all trying to spend the money at the same time, then you're going to run into problems with double spending the same outputs or other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily with the scheme, you can identify who is trying to do the spending, right? Of the subsets.
You wouldn't be able to tell from the on-chain transaction. You wouldn't know who signed.
Yeah, not as a public, but as a signer.
If you have good, you would need logging and forensics and stuff to figure it out.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, another really interesting scheme that I heard, I forgot who told me this. An idea that I heard was, since we have Taproot, one way that you could do Frost is you have a tap leaf for so say that you had a 3 of 5, just to keep the numbers small. So imagine if what you did was you had 5 tap leaves where each one had a single sig with one participant, and then a 2 of 4 Frost for the other ones. So you're still using Frost to aggregate most of your quorum down to a single signature, but then one of the signatures is identifiable. And whoever is being the coordinator, you have them have an exposed single signature in that tap leaf, and then you have everybody else aggregate down to a single key, and that way on chain you can identify who the coordinator was, and then you go to them and say who else signed. So I think that there's some tricks like that we could use to add some on-chain accountability while still keeping some of the benefits for really large quorum sizes. You're still doing a script path spend, so you don't get all of the benefits of Frost, but it's a way that if you were running a federated system, you could still have a lot of on-chain space savings, but still some accountability.
Very interesting.
But it's a great point that it does not solve the issue of the signers needing to know what they should actually sign. So, and this is typically, I think, the weakest point in a lot of these systems is if you can corrupt, let's say you have this giant system of servers and humans and all these different people signing, but you corrupt the actual address you're spending to, and whatever, services, the person inputs the address, this is where I want to spend, and then that's swapped out. And that system, sends to all the signers, hey, sign this transaction. There needs to be a way of authenticating, is this what I should actually sign? Is this correct or not? And that is oftentimes the easiest way to subvert these types of systems, is just corrupt the process by which the signers are believe that they're signing the correct thing.
Right. And is there a solution for that? Is there a sort of like a parallel sort of protocol or something where you are exchanging, you know, it's like you go back to the BSMS thing, the Bitcoin multi-sig, secure multi-sig thing, which is not like great either. I still think that we still haven't found, or at least like I don't know of, a good solution around transporting this stuff securely, right? Is this something that's being worked on, especially because, once because multi-sig is max 12 signers, really realistically speaking, with Frost is going to be, 100, 1,000, we don't know, right? So now having a proper protocol to do this, it's going to be really important.
The most adjacent and probably advanced is probably the VLS team, correct? I think because of essentially the trade-offs, though, with blind signing versus VLS, it varies greatly per use case, whether, once you're adding the velocity checks in the policy and the whitelisting and blacklisting and then thresholds and other things, at what point do you realize you're just recreating like a full node in another smaller hardware device, and if there's a better way of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, like there's a mix of, you want to do validation of whatever you're signing, like close to the signing. So this is the classic, like actually check that this is your change address, like make sure that, you're not spending to some derivation path that like you can't spend from in the future. Like there's that, but then there's also, you want to make sure that, the destination has some amount of like authenticity and like integrity protection hasn't been like tampered with in flight, and that opens up a lot of questions about like, okay, do I have some, trust on first use key that came from the coordinator and they're going to use that to like sign PSBTs that they send at me, or like, it's really complicated, and there's not like a standardized protocol for it yet. I think that's something that would be cool to see in some common like multi-sig coordinators and get that standardized, where you could have like interoperability between signers to have kind of like authenticated signing sessions. Would be a nice improvement for Frost, but also just for like P2SH style multi-sig as well.
Yeah, I also think the what is it? The stealth addresses or the new protocol,
silent payments.
Yeah. Could really help if we can have more static identifiers for payees, and that they could be, on people's Nostr or otherwise, where you'd have some out of band way of checking. Like, I'm a signer, I got a request to sign. Should I approve it or not? Well, it's being sent to Alice, and this is derivable from Alice's silent payment address, and I can check that she has that listed on her Nostr and on, maybe a couple other places. These ways of verifying that who you're sending it to, the address matches the intended recipient, and that there's multiple ways of checking that, and that we even maybe build out like secure address books or contact lists that allow this to be done in a secure way, I think is going to be part of the solution for this type of problem.
It's really funny. We were talking about people sending money to Nostr NPubs earlier. I just realized I'm pretty sure that you could use an NPub as a silent payment, like reusable identifier. So you actually could like send to somebody's NPub, but not have it be identifiable on chain that you're sending to somebody's NPub, which would be pretty dope.
Things are going to get so weird.
Yeah, things are going to get really freaky.
Things are going to get really, really weird. Okay, so on that vein, Jesse, have we missed anything in terms of like reviewing Frost and Roast to people, you think, like on your perspective?
I think we've covered all the main points, all the important stuff.
Okay, and I guess we can't really get into the weeds of implementations because we're still waiting for an implementation to sort of really be released. And once that's released, we're gonna start finding all the problems.
Well, hopefully that would be surfaced in review, but yeah.
I meant not the problems with the implementation, but like the practicality and sort of like how to actually use this in wallets and users and
integrating and applying it.
That's right.
So the order of operations is, you're on the SecP ZKP library, rebasing your PR. Then once you rebase it, I guess you'll ask for review, probably do the rounds like Bitcoin Core PR Review Club, whatever other, Bitcoin OpTech sessions, whatnot. And then after much more further scrutiny, we can expect to see it in the official like SecP 256K1 library, correct?
That may be a while. I mean, there's some discussion over what is this proper scope for these two different repos. So we've got the SecP 256K1, then we've got SecP 256K1-ZKP. And right now, mainly all the direct dependencies of Bitcoin Core are in SecP proper. And then things that aren't a direct dependency, like Musig, Frost, are in -ZKP. But there's been some discussion by the maintainers to potentially expand the scope of SecP proper to include cryptographic protocols that are relevant to Bitcoin but may not be a direct dependency, but only when we have a very high confidence in them. So eventually we'll hopefully see Frost and Musig and these systems make their way over to the main repo. But for now, that stuff is kind of living in ZKP, and ZKP is like a nice staging ground for some of the more experimental or new cryptographic protocols.
But like, what's nice is it doesn't we're not going to be dependent on, a soft fork or any kind of consensus change for this. Like, I think, a lot of folks are going to look at the ZKP implementation as like a reference implementation. Maybe it's really easy to integrate into other wallets. Maybe people use the SecP 256K fun one for like Rust applications. But, once there's sort of some standards, that there's community consensus around, people can start building on top of this stuff. And it doesn't necessarily have to end up in Bitcoin Core. Like, you don't have to be blocked on it getting into Core.
Yeah.
I mean, Core doesn't have a lot of things still that are in the double-digit bips. So it's normal, right? I mean, like I personally think that the Core wallet is going to slowly start to be so behind that like even the people who are very adamant about using it may not be using it anymore. And we're gonna just accidentally become Bitcoin Core as Core versus Bitcoin Core, the wallet, which was the intended separation that one day is going to happen. It's just too much, right, for that implementation to have on it. I mean, it's just it's silly, especially because it's not consensus code.
Right.
So we're all libbitcoin kernel shills now. But I was selfishly asking about the order of operations because, in the cold card, we use the SecP library. So I'm doing some mental math in my head and figuring out when I get to say when Frost to NVK, in a year or so, like just thinking about it from that angle.
I like taking Peter's approach is that never. And then, like the question goes away. And then, a month later, boom, here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once it's in ZKP, I think that's a good time to start using it. It could be years before it makes its way into SecP proper, not for a security reason or anything else, just because, there's a lot of like process questions and like of where code should live and stuff like that. One thing is also I'm working on a Frost BIP. So that will provide a standard way for anyone to implement it in a way that's compatible with Bitcoin. So we'll have that as well. And also I plan on implementing Rust bindings. I'm still kind of waiting to see how the Rust bindings work for Musig. Like, are we going to have a Rust ZKP or a Rust Bitcoin ZKP? That is where this kind of like repo stuff starts to get complicated, is like how the Rust dependencies build on top of it.
Can you even say the word Bitcoin and Rust together? I think it's still under litigation. So I'm calling it crust until until they resolve their legal issues.
Yeah, I better be careful. I don't want Craig Wright coming after me. So,
Well, there's a community fork of that language. I think it's called Crab. So maybe we'll have a Crab.
Crab sec P.
Why
Crab
didn't they call it
Sec P
crust? It was
library.
so good.
Naming is hard.
Yes. Anyways, okay. So yeah, I mean, like, it's the natural path for any sort of new primitive, right? I mean, I think the BIP is going to help clarify a lot. The fact that there is no consensus changes or needs is a huge deal. It means you don't need permission. You can start frosting all your things.
Do you have a BIP number, by the way, Jesse?
no BIP number yet, but I have a draft BIP that I have linked to in my PR.
Is that going to include roast, the same BIP?
Initially, it will not include roast. Once we get frost settled, then we can move on to roast. Even I don't even know if there's like a roast implementation out there currently. So
I remember at one point your Frost implementation was using part of Musig, I think, for the key generation. Is that still the case, or did that get punted?
I changed it. Yeah, initially I realized I could actually use like most of the Musig APIs for Frost if I changed the Frost protocol a little bit, where you actually create both a Musig and a Frost key. And I was just kind of seeing like how, like, there's a lot of overlap between like the signing protocol and the Nonces protocol between Frost and Musig are basically exactly the same, except for Frost, you're signing with a Shamir secret, and with Musig, you're not. So there's a lot of overlap, but in review and after talking to Jonas and Tim and stuff, we kind of decided it was better to like not try to merge these things. And we couldn't really come up with like a use case why it would be useful to have like a key that is both Musig and Frost. So, so now the current implementation has its own APIs. Some of them are modeled off of the Musig APIs, but it's not using any of the Musig APIs. And my refactor is bringing the implementation even closer to kind of how things are specified in the paper. So a lot of this kind of early, like weird stuff I was doing is kind of like made its way out of the implementation.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, that's nice because it means if somebody goes and reads the paper, they'll follow the implementation.
Yeah. There's one thing that we have kept that I think is kind of cool, which is the paper doesn't tell you how to implement the broadcast channel. It just says you need a broadcast channel. And so what we're doing is we're creating this hash of all the VSS commitments and signing that. And that is fulfilling this requirement for the broadcast channel. And another feature that I'm planning on adding is part of the protocol. You already need an authentication key for each participant. And so what I'm considering doing is using that authentication key to export. And this is actually LFI's idea when he was reviewing the PR, to export the shares. What's that?
Whose idea?
LFI?
Yeah.
The cryptographer. I forget his last name, but he's
Terzel or something.
Yeah, it starts with a T. He suggested that the API export encrypted shares from the key generation protocol, because that's left right now up to the user of the API, that you generate shares and you have to send them to other participants, but that needs to be done over a secure channel. But since we already have authentication keys baked into the protocol, what we can do is the API can use SHA-SHA-20 Poly 1305 to take the authentication key of the recipient, encrypt the share with that authentication key using Diffie-Hellman. And then that way, like built into the implementation, you already get the secure channels between all the participants. And another thing is my implementation works with BIP32 key derivation. So you can have a Frost key and then you can derive keys from it, and all the participants can sign the derived keys. It works with Taproot key tweaking as well. So all of that stuff is working with Frost.
Is there any particular reason you also chose like the same algos that Lightning has, like the Cha-Cha and the Poly?
Mainly because, well, Cha-Cha 20 Poly 1305 is like one of the best authenticated encryption ciphers. And we already have a Cha-Cha, not Cha-Cha 20, but we have a Cha-Cha API in SecP that's used for, I forget what it's used for. It was some kind of optimization for like hashing the block or something like that. But we have Cha-Cha in SecP, and Poly 1305 is like, doesn't take much to implement. So I figured I just throw that in, and then we'll have Cha-Cha 20 Poly 1305 in SecP, which will be nice because it's built on all the highly secure SecP low-level primitives and APIs, and we'll have tests for constant time and all of that stuff. So that might be useful in general for people who want to like use an authenticated encryption cipher.
Well, and also BIP 324, which is like the new encrypted P2P transport, that also uses Cha-Cha 20 Poly 1305. So yeah, I think they're using a different implementation, but it'd be really cool if they could just get that from libsecp.
That would. That's the peer-to-peer encryption BIP with.
Yeah, it's like opportunistic encryption for all the P2P traffic.
Very nice.
Yeah, Peter worked on it as well.
Yep.
Peter Vola.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Very cool, guys. All right. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, another boring episode where there's nothing happening in Bitcoin.
That's right. There's nothing happening in Bitcoin. We've managed to bore you to death. We've got some algebra lessons today and very basic stuff. And if you didn't understand everything here, you clearly don't have what it takes to be a clown wizard at a Bitcoin conference. And yeah, I mean, you know, like, what can I say? Bitcoin is dead. Listen, guys, this was awesome. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing this merged, because, you know, it's hard for people to start implementing client things until it's at least on ZKP, right? Because, you know, until it's there, kind of people go like it's never going to happen on Bitcoin, right? It's kind of a nice thing in a way. So, I mean, I'd love to have you again here, Jesse, when we have this hopefully on Cold Card and some other implementations around. And Rijndael, when you have some of your very cool, interesting projects you're involved in, maybe start leveraging some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for doing this. So let's just do a little round of any final thoughts, Mr. Vivek.
My brain is completely fried, even preparing for this and watching.
It's roasted, you mean?
Yes, it's roasted. I can't even use terms anymore. But after you watch like Chelsea Cumlow and like Tim Ruffing long enough and get to parse Jesse about implementations, your brain's just tapped out. Like, I'm a glazed donut up here right now. So I want to thank you guys again.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having
Jesse,
me
any
on.
final thoughts?
Yeah, just kind of jumped the gun there. Thanks for having me on. This has been great. And I'm always happy to chat about Frost. Please reach out to me if anybody's interested in learning more about it or reviewing it or implementing it, working on it. And more than happy to come back on the show anytime. And I'm just really excited for the future of key management. I think we're just barely even scratching the surface of what's possible. And I think it's going to be really important that these systems continually evolve and improve as they secure more and more data for more and more people.
So what you really have to say is that not your threshold of shards, not your Bitcoin?
Exactly. Well said.
And Rijndael, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so we talked about Frost a bunch. The original paper is called Frost Flexible Round Optimized Schnorr Threshold Signatures. So it should probably be Frost's, but whatever. It was written by Komlo and Goldberg. I actually really recommend, if you're interested in this stuff, like, go find the paper and read it. as far as cryptographic protocol papers, it's actually one of the more readable ones out there. And it does a good job of kind of walking you through all of the pieces underneath Frost and then how they come together and like why they come together the way that they do to make Frost. So if you're interested in this, definitely go and read the original paper and then pepper Jesse with lots of questions and he'll help you.
That's right. Let's give Jesse's phone number so people can just text him about their implementation questions and everything else. Just kidding. Well, guys, thank you so much. This was awesome. And with that, we're closing it up. Thanks for listening. For more resources, check the show notes. We put a lot of effort into them. And remember, we don't have a crystal ball, so let us know about your project. Visit bitcoin.review to find out how to get in touch.